This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
We also welcome our returning celebrity guest from my film discussion group, CineMadison. You know him from his previous appearance on Rounders. Please welcome back, Jesse Sertle.
It's so cheesy. I'm not a celebrity. Let's stop saying that. Oh, welcome back. I'm happy to be back, by the way.
Well, that is the most unexpected reaction I think I've ever gotten to that whole presentation. Most people are flattered. You, on the other hand, I don't know.
It's just celebrity guest. I'm loving it.
How you been since Rounders?
I've been since Rounders. I'm burnt. That's how I've been since Rounders. It's summertime. I'm enjoying it.
Burnt as in you're like burnt out, or burnt you've been up on too many roofs adjusting people's hail damage?
Both. I burnt out, burnt to a crisp, and then on my days off, I get burned even more because I go out in the sun and I burst into flames. So I'm loving it.
All right. Well, for tonight, for our 219th episode, we discuss the film that ushered in the counterculture era of the new Hollywood with Easy Rider from 1969, celebrating its 55th anniversary this week. Directed by Dennis Hopper, written by Peter Fonda, Dennis Hopper and Terry Southern, starring Dennis Hopper as Billy, Peter Fonda as Wyatt/Captain America, Jack Nicholson as George Hansen, Luke Askew as Stranger on Highway, Phil Spector as Connection, Karen Black as Karen, couldn't think of a more creative name, and Tony Basil as Mary. Recognition for this movie? Released by Columbia Pictures on July 14th, 1969, Easy Rider earned $60 million worldwide compared to a modest film budget of $400,000, becoming the fourth highest grossing film of 1969. Critics have praised the performances, directing, writing, soundtrack, and visuals. It received 2 Academy Award nominations for Best Original Screenplay for Fonda, Hopper, and Southern, and Best Supporting Actor for Jack Nicholson. Along with Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate, Easy Rider is recognized as having helped kickstart the new Hollywood era during the late 1960s and 70s by leading the major studios to realize that money could be made from low-budget films made by avant-garde directors. These films of the so-called post-classical Hollywood were heavily influenced by the French New Wave and came to represent a counterculture generation increasingly disillusioned with its government as well as the government's effects on the world at large and the establishment in general. Easy Rider has been recognized by the AFI in the following lists. AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies at number 88, AFI's 100 Years, 100 Songs with Born to Be Wild at number 29, AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies 10th Anniversary Edition at number 84. In 1998, the film was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. Easy Rider currently holds an 84% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, an 85 score on Metacritic, and a 3.7 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So, as we begin each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
This is the second time I've seen the entire film. I think the last time I saw it was probably about 20 years ago. I've seen clips and pieces of it, and that's it. I don't have a real strong relationship to the movie. And then having watched it again, I understand why.
And Jesse, what about you?
I thought about this one because I have a long history with this movie, even though I've only seen it twice. But I know my first incidence with this movie is actually the Starsky and Hutch Ben Stiller movie from 2000 something, early 2000s. They had that one scene where they're actually like riding the bikes in, and it's got the song playing, and he's dressed up like Dennis Hopper. That's my first kind of inroads to it. And then the second one was when I was in college in a film class, and we actually had a discussion point on one of the scenes in the movie. I think it was the weed smoking scene. I can't remember exactly what the discussion was, but I remember that, and it stuck in my head as something to watch. Like I said, I've only seen the movie twice, and the first time I saw it, what the heck? I was at a like a muscle car convention. The only way to really describe it, and then like on the side there was a theater, and the theater was playing Easy Rider, and I'm like, I've seen this one scene about the weed smoking. Let's see the entire movie, and I decided to watch the whole movie. And that was the only time up until a few weeks ago, if I watched it for this, I ever watched the movie.
I will make it a three-peat or thrice the action in this one that I have also seen it only 2 times. The first time was during the pandemic because it was on a watch list of all these AFI movies that I wanted to get through. And I sat down and I think it was like on Freevee or something through Prime. I just decided to watch it because it was available. And I remember being bored out of my mind and not necessarily looking forward to this one particularly because it's not really a movie about anything. Not to preempt that question, which is normally our second one, what this movie's about, but it just seems so micro culture. Like it was about 2 guys doing something wistful, but they don't really go anywhere. There's not like a ton of plot. It's just kind of a hangout movie, more or less, with these 2 characters that, I don't know, I don't think there are a whole lot of guys like this anymore, at least in our generation. Although I will admit, Starsky and Hutch with Ben Stiller is a guilty pleasure movie of mine. But my beginning nature with this film actually extends back even further to my father telling me what Easy Rider was because there was a joke in the Nickelodeon cartoon Rocket Power that the dads were involved in Easy Nose Rider with surfing, and I had no idea what Easy Rider was.
When I first saw the movie, I explained to my parents that I watched Easy Rider. They had never talked to me or explained anything about that movie up until that point. And then they're like, oh yeah, and they started talking about it. And I'm like, really? You've known me for like 30 plus years now. This is the first time we've talked about this movie.
I just can't imagine that it's one that people bring out of the woodwork as something that, unless you experienced it in the time that it really originally came out, is something that people are like rewatching or going back to often. It just doesn't come up.
You are right about that, but it's just so strange. And I'm like, it's a very meaty movie. I think it's a very meaty movie.
So what is the movie actually about then, if it is about anything?
My opinion of the movie is about 2 outsiders trying to find a way in to a certain subgroups. Because each scene they're dealing with a different part of, I would assume, is the America in 1969. So you got the communes, you got the South, you got the small towns, you got the big towns, people. And that's what I feel like these guys are trying to find their way in to be a part of some sort of society, at the same time not wanting to be.
For me, I think the movie is about Dennis Hopper, Peter Fonda, and Rip Torn sitting around getting high and writing a script, and this is the result.
Rip Torn wasn't involved in this.
Oh, yes, he was.
Okay, he's not credited.
I know. There's a big controversy between the fact that Rip Torn was originally helped write it, and he was supposed to be the Jack Nicholson character. And he claims Dennis Hopper pulled a knife on him. And there was a lawsuit for defamation that was filed in the 70s about it from Rip Torn stating that on The Tonight Show.
You gotta be mean. That's the only way you can play.
Yeah. But no, I think more than anything, it's about seeking happiness.
I found that the film most describes the freedom to be uniquely you. Like, these guys aren't necessarily, if they're looking to belong, it's in their own way. They don't want to conform if they do want to belong to something. And I guess that's kind of been the nature, everybody who tries to be different. I always thought it was kind of odd in high school or in middle school that there were all these guys that really wanted to be different, but they wanted to be different together. It made no sense to me.
The counterculture, and when I was in college, everybody wore tie-dye and you know, looked like they were out of the 60s, and this is in the 80s. So I decided I wanted to be original, so I went the other direction, and I wore chinos and a tie to class every day.
Yeah, you went super preppy and nerdy.
They did.
There's nothing wrong with that. That seems like a good look. A suit and a tie. I would never do it, but I love the look.
I could not believe you to ever be in a suit or tie.
I can pull it off. I look pretty good in a suit or tie.
I'm not saying that you couldn't, but on an average day, like if you showed up to our discussion group in a suit, I would ask what was wrong with you.
Whose funeral did you just come from?
Yeah,
that's usually the only time I wear a suit and tie is a funeral.
So on a historical level, I think that generally this is understood to be one of the few films that kind of like turns the page into the new Hollywood era of the 70s, where we had these artistic films that were given big budgets by studios for really the first time. Otherwise, we had up to that point really kind of cookie cutter films that had to get around the Hays Code. All the stuff that was much more auteurish was coming from Europe. But is this really the new Hollywood movie?
This film, more than anything else, showed that you could have an independent film with a unique concept or idea and make money from it. And it opened the door to all kinds of independent film directors to start proposing wilder concepts. So I think this didn't just open the door, I think it kicked it down, because I don't think anybody in their right mind thought this film was going to be the fourth highest grosser of that year.
Well, for the sake of argument, let's point out that a couple of years prior, they pointed out for, I think it was 1968, The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde. But I'll also point to 2001: A Space Odyssey that's doing a lot of work in this space. All films that were high-grossing films that didn't necessarily get the awards attention, but were making a decent amount of money.
Like, I didn't even know this was a 69 movie. I thought this was the 70s, to be honest. Just thinking about that movie, like it represents more of the 70s type of movies that I've seen. So I associate this more with the lower budget 70 movies that were, the avant-garde and tour movies. So I could see the point where it knocked down the door for that. Like, I don't associate 70 movies with the space 2001: A Space Odyssey. That seems definitely early 60s vibe to me, even though it was made in the late 60s.
But then again, does it represent really the start or the precursor of the new Hollywood? Is this the moment that new Hollywood starts?
I would say so, in my opinion. Yeah, this is probably the start of it. I could see like the precursor being The Graduate, because it's kind of trying to address some of the issues of society at the time, but it still had more of that Hollywood feel, like a normal type of movie. Well, this is completely outside the bounds.
I read a book a few years ago on the 16/8 Academy Awards, and the opening scene of the book is a very young Mike Nichols going to a party at Henry Fonda's house. And he goes in and he walks in the door, and Henry Fonda is sitting there, and Jimmy Stewart is playing the piano, and it's the old Hollywood actors. Gregory Peck is there, and they're all standing around having cocktails. Well, he doesn't feel real comfortable because he's kind of young, and I think he said he was wearing jeans and whatever because he was a younger guy. Well, he kind of migrated through the kitchen and saw people in the backyard, and he went out in the back, and there's Peter and Jane and all of their friends, and they're smoking grass. Well, he feels he's a little too old for that, and so he stands under this tree, just kind of wondering what he's going to do. And the guy starts talking to him, and they start talking about how they kind of feel like they're in between two eras of Hollywood. And so the two of them started talking about what kinds of things they enjoyed and liked, and they introduced each other. He says, "I'm Mike Nichols," and the other guy says, "I'm Buck Henry." And that's the collaboration that led to The Graduate. And the whole concept of this book is that The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde started the new Hollywood tradition, but it just bumped the door open. Again, I go back to this one being the one that kicked it down.
And that is a book that I believe I will be trying to read for our appearance on the Revisionist Almanac, I think, releasing in December for our year of 1967.
Oh, the parts in there talking about doing Dr. Dolittle are hilarious. I mean, Rex Harrison so hated doing that film.
Well, I can already tell you I don't think I will be watching that one for the 1967 episode because I can only imagine how bad it is.
Rex Harrison had a voice range of 4 notes.
Yeah, well, you watch My Fair Lady and you can tell why.
Yeah. He was rapping before rapping became a thing.
So the other thing that I would really ask as kind of a precursor into our discussion tonight is we know that this is historically relevant, but is it still relevant now as a film?
I'm thinking about it. That's the one thing I kind of wrestle about. Is it still relevant now? I wouldn't say now, no. Because we've had so much time in between. There's so much things that come up. I wouldn't say it's irrelevant now.
I do feel that this is pretty dated. I think that it is of its time and era, but it's about people that are specifically from this era and have not translated over time.
I had the same opinion for about 48 hours after we finished watching it. And then I started thinking about it. And now I come to the opposite conclusion, which is this film is about disconnection between groups of people. And I think it has more relevancy now than I thought it would, because I think it explains how we in this country right now have such a dichotomy between in political views, where we don't understand why certain people are behaving in a certain way and other people can't understand why we're behaving in this way. And I think this film has more to say about that than what we understand, which is the lack of trying to understand.
And you just hit me with all the good points. I haven't had a disagreement yet with that. That's the things I was kind of wrestling with too. Is if the
don't worry, it's the common refrain on this particular show that the guest always ends up agreeing more with Dana than with me. I somehow become the villain of my own show.
He's got good points.
It's the Scooby snacks.
So, Dad, are you ready to dig more into the movie? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
I do. In the open road odyssey Easy Rider, director Dennis Hopper and co-star Peter Fonda embody the restless spirit of the 1960s counterculture. The film, a rambling narrative of freedom and disillusionment, follows 2 bikers, Wyatt, Fonda, and Billy, Hopper, as they traverse the American Southwest in search of authenticity and liberation. The duo's journey, funded by a drug deal, becomes a kaleidoscope exploration of the American landscape, both physical and culture. The film captures a nation in transition with its stunning cinematography, showcasing the vastness of America while contrasting it with the intimacy of its small towns and eccentric characters. Along the way, they encounter an assortment of characters, from an idealistic lawyer, Jack Nicholson, to a communal farm representing the era's ideological classes. Easy Rider is a raw, poignant, and at times tragic reflection on the price of freedom and the inevitable collision between personal liberty and social norms. The film's haunting ending, set against the backdrop of a sunset over the American landscape, leaves viewers with a sense of loss and contemplation. Hopper's direction, combined with Fonda's cool demeanor and Nicholson's electrifying performance, creates a cinematic experience that is as timeless as it is of its time.
Thank you. Did you know? Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda did not write a full script for the movie, and made most of it up as they went along. They didn't hire a crew, but instead picked up hippies at communes across the country, and used friends and passers-by to hold the cameras, and were drunk and stoned most of the time while filming. Did you know? Dennis Hopper was going through a very bad time during production, something he later put down to marijuana being not his quote-unquote creative drug of choice. He was in a state of drug-induced paranoia, and he screamed at everyone. Crew members secretly recorded his tirades and sent the tapes to the production company in Los Angeles to explain why so many of them quit quit the film. Did you know? According to Jack Nicholson, he, Dennis Hopper, and Peter Fonda went through 155 joints while filming the campfire scene.
Wow. Whew.
That is a enormous amount.
It's no wonder Peter Fonda died of lung cancer.
Did you know? The film's driving sequences were among the first to deliberately use a lens flare to add atmosphere. Initially derided because they had failed to keep the shots clean, the technique went on to become commonplace in cinematography. Did you know? It was one of the first films to make extensive use of previously released musical tracks, rather than a specifically written film score. This is common with films now, but was quite unusual at the time, with the exceptions being the Beatles films and some other special cases. Did you know? Peter Fonda got the idea for this movie after seeing a picture of him and Bruce Dern on their motorcycles. He got Dennis Hopper, who was planning to get out of acting altogether and become a teacher at the time, involved when he promised him he could direct the film. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 220th episode, we welcome back our current guest, Jesse Sertle of CineMadison, and my brother-in-law, Keith Techmeyer, to discuss my favorite film of 2019, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, for its 5th anniversary. Can't believe it's been 5 years. Directed and written by Quentin Tarantino, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, and Margot Robbie. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. And Jesse, if anybody wanted to get in touch with you or likes your work on this episode, is there any social connection you would encourage people to do, or you want to remain relatively anonymous?
Connection? I guess my Instagram. So stay away from my Facebook.
Okay.
I don't even know. Oh, I'm looking. I have 2 phones here. I looked at the wrong phone. I don't even know my Instagram account's spelled. Probably just my name.
Well, I tell you what, I'll have your handle available on the video itself in text form, and I'll have it up on the website and in the episode description for anybody that wants it out there.
No, I'll figure it out. Okay, the next episode. You know,
next week? Yeah.
Next week, that one episode closer to that gold jacket. I'm looking forward to it.
Gold jacket?
Yeah.
The G-Mote Hall of Fame or something?
Yeah. I told you that's what we got to do. You said something about hats. No, we got to do gold jackets.
I think gold jacket has to come at like 35 appearances or something.
I'd say 10.
No, 10 is the t-shirt.
10 is the t-shirt? Okay, 20.
We haven't determined what 15 or 20 are yet officially.
Yes.
Gold jacket.
I think we've kind of somewhat settled on the tumbler set being 15.
Okay. I think gold jacket's obviously the 20.
Okay. Anywho, this would normally be our section for Ask Dana Anything, but we have not received any listener questions, both for the remaining questions at the end of this, as well as any Ask Dana Anything. So unless our guest has a couple provided for us.
Oh, yeah. Number
you
one.
do?
I do. What is the drink of choice over there?
Bourbon.
Bourbon?
Yes. As I've gotten more into bourbon, I like different ones at different times. Little different tastes, different flavors, little combinations of stuff, different strengths of the proof. So some are single barrel, some are a little more. My common everyday is Evan Williams, but I also like Elijah Craig as a go-to. I have some that are better, a little bit more pricey that I do on the weekends. I started out with bourbon. My father-in-law started me on brandy when I was first married. Read an article in GQ talking about how to make the perfect Manhattan. And so I started doing that and eventually got to the point where, why am I ruining this good whiskey with sweet vermouth? And just went to straight bourbon.
I like that. I like that a lot.
All right. Anything else?
No, that's it. I just saw him drinking some drink. I just want to know what that was.
For reference sake, he has often referred to it as his dad juice. And if we do go to the tumbler set, I believe that catchphrase will be on the tumblers.
Be drinking some dad juice right now. Yeah.
Yep.
It started when the kids were all small and they would have their orange juice or whatever, or their juice cups. And so I would say, well, you have your juice, I have mine.
All right, let's move on. We left off at best performance. Dad, who do you have down?
I have Dennis Hopper.
I do
And
as
it's
well.
not his acting as much as the directing and the writing, or semi-writing.
Yeah, I don't think he's the primary character in this, even though he's one of the two leads. He's kind of a lot in the background. Like, there's a lot of things where things are happening to these guys as opposed to them doing anything other than riding on the motorcycles. But yes, it's the total package, whether it's the accreditation for the writing and the ad-libbing that he obviously had to do, the direction as a whole, and his presence in the film. I got very close to my secondary being my top choice, which is the soundtrack, but ultimately I landed on Hopper.
I get that now. You put it like all in one. I get it.
Yeah.
You can't be just the actor, but I still think Jack Nicholson is the best performance on this. This is the only reason that I would even remember this movie is because of Jack Nicholson. Like, I understand Dennis Hopper's importance of it being director and partially writing it and acting in it, but the one that stands out throughout the whole movie is Jack Nicholson. He'd be the only reason why I'd watch it again is to see his performance in it. Because I thought his performance was on.
Yeah, the movie really picks up when he's on screen, and it really declines when he's off of it. Yeah. I think he is by far the most charismatic thing about the movie, and that's why I went with him in most charismatic. But
So did I.
got very close between all three of these. Like, had Hopper not had one of those three tick marks in his column, I would have very easily gone with either the soundtrack or with Jack Nicholson, are the two probably predominant things I remember the most about this movie.
But Hopper's is my secondary performance for those reasonings that how much he's actually worked with the extra group. I mean, being director, being partially writer, and his performance is pretty good in that movie. I mean, it's no Blue Velvet, but it's very good.
True.
Well, I think that's just a much different movie because of who's writing and directing it. Dad, who was your best secondary?
Laszlo Kovacs.
The cinematographer?
Yes. I just was struck. The first time I watched it, I didn't watch for it, but this time when I'm watching it, I was just struck by the beautiful cinematography of the film. It just made the film for me. It was the most entertaining portion of the film to me.
So you love the scenes of the bike riding and you get the desert in the background of the. Okay.
Given that that covers probably 60% of the film is them out on the road just with the soundtrack in the background, I would say easily that could be construed as the number one thing about the movie.
And with the soundtrack in the background, yeah.
Well, and that's why I would go with the soundtrack as my secondary, is that it just becomes so much of a character combined with the movie. They had to have something over these scenes where these guys are just riding across the desert or across the Southwest. And you have to make it somewhat engaging and entertaining. And so you select a great list of pop soundtrack to go along with all of it. And these are some relatively iconic songs that there's a part of me that, much like we said on Forrest Gump 2 weeks ago, if a lot of these songs got made much more popular by their presence in this movie.
I always just wanted to be like at the fly in the wall of that meeting. There had to have been some sort of meeting where they were choosing these movies. Just so these songs throughout the movie. I just like to hear what they were actually thinking about, why they chose a particular song for a particular scene. Yeah, so like a lot of these songs made perfect sense for the scene that they were in, like almost to a T. So I just kind of wonder what their thought process was for it.
And I would be more interested in some of these older films. Like, newer films have like a specific director of music acquiring. So they'll say, I need a song that represents this. And then they'll bring in like 2 or 3 selections and then they get to pick from that. But to narrow it down to that, in a modern sense, is much less than when you're picking it cold out of the middle of nowhere in the 60s and you're going through these huge music libraries where you don't have the same ability to sort through the massive amounts of stuff. So I wonder how curated they had everything when it came to their musical tastes back then. Like, how big into certain music were these guys?
Well, you have to stop and think, too. This is at a time where a lot of these songs were done by the counterculture musicians of the time, the young rockers. It's not to say that these were even the songs that were their first choice. It could very well have been that they had other songs picked out and couldn't secure the rights.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I would just love to be part of that process, or at least observe it, just to see how exactly they came to that point and got to that song.
So I already gave my most charismatic. Jesse, what do you have as your most charismatic?
I mean, it's the same thing as Jack Nicholson again. Like, the movie pops the moment he's on it, and it basically dies the movie he leaves. The moment he leaves. So I would disagree with him. I think he is the reasoning to go see the movie in this time and age, just to go and see his performance.
Yeah, this is not a memorable performance from Dennis Hopper's farm as I'm concerned. I think he pops much more in like Hoosiers or Speed, where he's got a little bit more meat to work with. And he's pulling double duty here as his directorial debut. And I don't remember him really being in a whole lot before this movie. I think he built a career probably out of the backing of this movie. And I really don't have anything other than this movie where I've seen Peter Fonda in something. So by that extension, Nicholson clearly was the winner of the film because he goes on to this great career off of this movie. He uses this to, the next couple of years have some of the great movies of all time that we've just recently discussed.
Hopper had a very successful career developing in the late 50s, early 60s, doing westerns and other parts where he's the third or fourth star in the film, playing the young kid, the son of somebody, etc. And when he started getting into the counterculture, he kind of got blackballed a bit by Hollywood and started having a problem getting roles, which thus is why he was talking about becoming a teacher, because he couldn't land the roles anymore. He had somewhat of a career, but this was the defining moment where he was able to develop a new or different career path. If you ever want to see something hilarious, go on YouTube and type in Grand Ole Opry Willie Nelson, and you'll find Willie Nelson in suits, standing at the Grand Ole Opry, rhinestone suits in the 1950s. And you look at him then, as opposed to the 91-year-old burnout with the ponytail that he is now.
Braids, not ponytail.
Braids, excuse me.
That'd be interesting. I gotta look that up. I gotta write that down. But Peter Fonda, wasn't he in Escape from L.A. as a cameo?
I don't know. I've never seen it.
You don't need to. It's not a very good movie.
I had already said I had Nicholson. People talk about the acting performance. Okay, I was good, but I don't think it was that exceptional. He didn't have that much to do in the film. But what made it good is he, against that backdrop, popped. And that's the charisma aspect.
Yeah, I think it's a movie star performance. There isn't a lot written down. He was following a very careful script, but he just had something that was an ineffable quality you just couldn't quite put your finger on, and that got him multiple other chances very quickly in short succession.
This was ideal for him because he had spent the previous 5 or 6 years in Roger Corman's studios, where Corman had outlines instead of scripts because he couldn't pay for writers.
All right, let's go to best scene then. I have 5 nominees, and then you guys can nominate any ones you'd like after that. I mean, this isn't a terribly long movie, so I don't know how many scenes you really want to nominate, but number 1, I have communal living. Number 2, I have Meeting George, so the entrance for Jack Nicholson's character in the jail. Then I have Harassment in Louisiana, which kind of ends with Nicholson getting beat to death. And if you want to include, I don't know if it includes the campfire scene specifically, but that does happen after that, so I don't know.
That's a very long scene then.
Yeah, I know, because it kind of incorporates 2 things with this big campfire sequence in the middle of it. Then I have LSD Trip, which is their time in the New Orleans cemetery. and then one last ride, basically the ending of the film. So if we took the harassment to be them in the diner as opposed to them getting beat, which I guess I'll take that, I would assume one of you wants to include the campfire scene as well.
Oh yeah, I would include the campfire scenes. I think that's the best scene in the movie.
Okay. So, Jesse, why is the campfire scene then the best scene of the movie?
I think it just explains everything for the movie. And, like, you get so much dialogue about what they're thinking about in the culture at that time. Because one of his lines, he's asking, they're afraid of us. No, they're not afraid of you. They're afraid of what you represent. And then his speech kind of going over that, how this culture that's going on, that's changing the social norms, is making people afraid. And that's what they're actually afraid of. They're not afraid of the person. They're afraid of change. I think it's the deepest scene you got in the whole movie, because all the other scenes are, just riding down the bike and then people not liking them.
I didn't know which one I was going to go with for best scene on this one, but I think I'm going to tend to agree with you. You've convinced me.
I'm going to venture out on my own. It's meeting George. Because what this film is about is having two diverse worlds that are running parallel to each other. And George is the conduit by which the two worlds meet. And it's in part because he's a professional. Even though he is a liberal, ne'er-do-well, do-gooder, he still has the respect because he's a lawyer. And as a result, he's able to do things like get them out of jail and to talk to the sheriff and, make sure things are taken care of. Ironically, the person who's the conduit between the two worlds is the one who ends up beaten to death. I wonder if that's by happenstance. So, but I think that scene is ultimately what shows the whole aspect of this, which is the two worlds trying to come together and then not making it. And it starts with meeting him in jail and setting that line out where it's going to be the two parallel lines trying to come together at some point in time through him.
So I asked this as you being the only lawyer officially on the podcast. Do you really feel the respect of culture at large or society at large?
Yes. I do. Even if people who don't like lawyers, there's a certain element of respect that I have. It's part of everybody always tells me that I'm intimidating, and I think in part it's the fact that I'm a lawyer that comes as part of that. That it's just a fact that's somewhat intimidating. I don't try to be, and I mean, I never have tried to be anything, but even in my little community, I try not to lord it over. In fact, half the time I don't tell people. I mean, I've been going to my class reunions every 5 years, pretty much since graduation, and probably every class reunion, at least one or two people will ask me what I do for a living, because I don't make it a big deal that, hey, I went to law school. Okay, I just had certain gifts and advantages, and I used them. So what? It doesn't make me any better or any worse than anyone else.
Ah, yes. Dana Duncan, man of the people, yet again.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
It's got a good ring to it. Man of the people. That should be on the back of the gold jacket. Man of the people.
Okay.
I'm going to have a hat made up that way. Man of the people.
You do that. All right, favorite scene. I'm going to go for meeting George, just because we've all said it now that the movie kind of picks up when Nicholson's there and it declines when he's not. So the introduction of him kind of is my favorite part of the movie, because it's part of the only part of the film where I felt it was watchable.
So I already said basically the campfire scene, but I just kind of noticed this, that our best scenes, I don't know what your favorite scene is at Dana, but I know our best scenes so far, it's all when Jack Nicholson rides. You noticed that?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I have meeting George.
Yeah.
Is my favorite too.
Most indelible, I have either the motorcycles or the soundtrack.
Yeah, it's the soundtrack. I think I the Shazam app. I was trying because there were some songs I couldn't remember the names of them, and I'm just like holding it up to the screen, like, what's the song again? I'm like, that's the thing that made the most mark on me. And then, yeah, it's the soundtrack.
It's them out riding with the soundtrack playing. Pure and simple. That's what the lasting image of this film is.
It's definitely something everybody does. I mean, I blare the music when I'm driving because I don't have a motorcycle, unfortunately.
Any disagreement, Pop?
Yes. If ever in my life I had any doubts about, what I was missing by not taking LSD, watching that scene, the disorientation that I couldn't figure out what the fuck is this supposed to be, rested in my mind that I am glad I have never touched LSD.
Are we talking about the student film section of the movie? Because that's what I got out of that scene. Is like, this is something you see at like a student film course, or if you go to the an art museum, or they're like artsy films. And like, that's something I got out of it. I'm like, this was something that stuck out like a sore thumb in this movie. I didn't understand why it was filmed or even part of it.
Do you remember those SNL skits, Dad, where they had like that experimental art crap?
Yes.
And then they were like, the parents never understood it, but the kids are like, you're so misunderstanding. You don't get us at all.
Yes, I know. That was just where I was going with this.
I mean, like, I went to one this past weekend, and that's the first thing that popped in my head when I saw this scene. I'm like, I just saw this, but in a different version at this art exhibit I was at.
It reminds me of the cut scene in The Meaning of Life, where they just kind of stuck that in, and at one point Terry Moore has got these really weird arms, and he's going fishy, 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 fish.
I think that's a good spot to take our second break. We'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, as of this last month, all of our episodes are all now in video format. That's right, you can see my resting nerd face and all of Dana's famous OKs in pristine high definition. So far, we have The Hangover, Batman 1989, Forrest Gump, and our revisit of 12 Angry Men available to watch. Just head to youtube.com/@GMotePodcast, or I have the full video and audio feeds on our website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMotePodcast for the individual episode page. Both of those are in the episode description of this episode, so check us out there, and if you do, please like the video or subscribe to us. We would really appreciate it. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
We do. John Landau, 63, American film producer. Titanic, Avatar, Alita, Battle Angel. Oscar winner in 1998.
For Titanic.
Yes.
And so we remember him fondly here for his contributions with a moment of silence here in his honor. Thank you. All right, best, funniest lines. I only have 4 down, but I will go with the line here that I ended last week with. If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him.
I mean, it's a funny line to me, but when they're sowing the seeds and they're saying, Dennis Hopper's like, they're not going to make it, and Peter Fonda's like, they're going to make it. It's just, in my own mind, I'm like, no, they're not. It's funny to me. But just the way he delivers it, I'm like, he's so profoundly thinking it's going to happen. I'm like, no, it's not.
George, they'll talk to you and talk to you and talk to you about individual freedom. But they see a free individual, it's going to scare them.
I mean, it's real hard to be free when you are bought and sold in the marketplace.
I don't have any more. That's a good one.
I'm out.
Okay, I had one last one. Billy, listen, do you think you can help us get out of here with no sweat? George, well, I imagine that I can if you haven't killed anybody. At least nobody white.
Yeah.
If that doesn't describe the late 60s, I don't know what does.
Yeah.
All right. You gentlemen ready to start the Stanley rubric?
Oh, yes.
Well, let's crack the knuckles. Yeah.
All right. Let's start off here with legacy. And just as a reminder to our audience, this is a measurement of the film's overall legacy itself, as how it is represented, how it's understood, how it is aged 5 years after it came out. So roughly from 1974 to today, how is this movie aged with both the audience and the industry? Dad, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go second.
I will try to make this relatively simple. I had come up with a couple of descriptors for my own rubric scoring when it came to legacy recently, and roughly a 4 on my list is this is a must-watch film for most critics and or it changed industry practices. So when we talked about the lens flare earlier in the Did You Know section, or we talked about the soundtrack of mostly pop songs coming to the forefront, now that's both of those are recognized techniques among their particular points of the industry, and the fact that this has still appeared twice on the AFI list, I put it roughly at about a 4 for the industry. However, on the flip side of it, from the audience perspective, I don't know how many, even in the nerd film community, has seen this movie. Like, you could make a very credible argument to me that most of the film nerd community has seen it, or maybe about half have seen it. Now, the difference between a 1, a 2, and a 3, 1 is if really nobody has seen this film, and I don't think that's quite true. 2 for me is about if half of the film nerd community has seen it, and 3 is a film that most of the film nerd community has seen it, but not a really like a lot of the normal casual film fans or the normies as we have kind of deemed them. So I have this somewhere about a 2, maybe a 2.5 I could be talked into, but I overall have a 6.
Industry. And this film, I mean, a lot of times in Hollywood, things change, but they only change temporarily. They don't stay changed. And I think this film, because it made money and it showed producers and studios that you could make money on independent projects, I think it changed a lot. And I think the studio system was dying and was about dead when this did. This was the stake in the heart. And I think it impacted film for 2 decades. Even though the film itself probably doesn't. So I gave it a 5 for the industry for that reason. Now, I agree with you. The public, nobody's seen this film, or very few have. And those that have, if you've seen it, you probably are carrying an ARP card because you were the age when this film came out. There's a reason why everybody in this film is dead. Okay, they're all gone.
Whoa, we got one. Come on, he's not dead yet. Jack is still alive. Come on.
Oh, well, have you seen him lately or seen a last picture of him, which was a year ago?
Yeah, he's retired. He's living life.
Okay, he looks like a recluse, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's got Alzheimer's. He was not looking good. Anyway, so I'm going to go with the 2.5 for the public. And I'm only giving it a half point higher simply because the public has enjoyed the benefits or the fruits of this film. I don't think you're going to have Coppola. I don't think you're going to have Scorsese. I don't think you're going to have De Palma without this film. So I'm at a 7.5.
I was going to say, I'm in agreement with an industry. I think it's a 5. I think you have movies before this and the movies after this. And I feel like this really affected the 70s. I don't know much about the 80s. I think there's a couple of movies might affect the 80s. I think we kind of have a rebound towards more of the studio movies in the 80s. But I do think this has a huge effect on the movies out of the 70s. And then those directors and filmmakers that came out of that particular time area. The audience, I give it a 3.5 on the audience. Mostly because where I first saw this movie was at a particular road show. Now, the most people there weren't carrying the ARP card. They were more than my age. But there were a couple of card carriers there. But I still I feel like there's a particular culture in this country that would aspire and watch this movie and cherish this movie. It just might not be ours.
Fair enough. So that raises the average among the three of us to a 7.33.
For our foreign guests, ARP stands for Association of Retired People.
Isn't it the American Association of Retired People?
Yeah, I guess it is AA, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's move to impact and significance. And for anyone out there that needs a refresher on this category, it is the 5 years we just ignored for legacy. This would be the initial 5 years from 1969 to 1974, and how this impacted things in the industry, the careers of the people who made this film, whether or not other films tried to emulate or copy this. And on that standpoint, I think I would have a harder time saying it's not a 5. I think that's part of the reason that I went a little bit lower on the previous category. I think the further out you get from this movie, the less of a legacy it tends to have. But in the immediate, I think especially that we established this is kind of a harbinger of the 70s, it's kind of a 5 on the industry. And because it's the number 4 overall grossing film of this particular year, I think it had a lot of cultural significance. People knew the reference point. I have to go a 4 on that side of it. So I have a 9.
I mean, I'm a little bit higher than you. I have a 5 and a 5 on both of them.
Okay.
I just feel like I said before, this is huge significance at the time. It affects the rest of the decade. Just like I'm agreeing with everything you said there. It affects the rest of the 70s. I mean, finding out that it made $60 million, the fourth highest grossing in that year. I mean, obviously it had a big impact of that year itself. So I would give them 5 and 5s. I wouldn't even dip below that. So that's a 10.
For me, I went with a 5 for the industry. Nicholson's career launched. Most of the things I said about legacy were definitely apropos within that first 5 years. Public, I can't go with a perfect 5. I went with a 4.5. And this is why. There is no way in hell my dad would have went and seen this film. There's no way your grandfather, Tom, would have went and seen this film.
Well, now you've cited both of my grandfathers. I do want to specify, because you said your dad, that would also have been my grandfather, but you're meaning
correct.
My other grandfather.
Yes, your other grandfather, yes.
Who ironically is also named Ron.
Yes. Very conservative, very straight-laced traditionalists. Okay. So this did not bode well for a certain segment of American society. And I can't give it a perfect 5 for that reason.
To be fair, my mother's father, also named Ron, who is still living, has often cited that the diversity in southwest Minnesota where he grew up were the Catholic families. So
wonderful.
Yeah. Hippies would not have been something that he would have really...
He wouldn't have liked my family then. What to say?
He wouldn't have liked my dad's family had it not been that... Yeah.
In fact, he didn't.
The Duncans are an interesting breed.
Yeah. Yeah, that somebody should ask at some point in time in one of my 88 about my family, because they're a colorful lot.
Well, there was a time where we thought you had one cousin on death row in Georgia.
He wasn't on death row. He just was serving a 25-year sentence.
You have to understand, at my grandfather's funeral, and this would be the namesake of our studio company, Ronnie Duncan. At my grandfather's funeral, the cousins all compared prisons and their comfort levels.
In Wisconsin, yes. And I was involved in the conversations. Only I was the one who could leave when I wanted. I had been there professionally because I used to do appellate work for the state public defender. And so I have been in every prison in Wisconsin except Supermax down in Boscobel.
Oh. What would you say is the best one then?
Actually, there are two that are really nice. It's Kettle Moraine, because it's right in the middle of the Kettle Moraine State Forest, and Fox Lake, which is right on the edge of that. Not only that, but with regular TV and an antenna, because you were allowed to purchase a small TV for yourself. You were able to get Milwaukee and Fond du Lac television stations as well. So you had good, opportunity to watch different shows. I used to say that for appellate work, if one of my clients got transferred to Kettle Moraine or Fox Lake, they'd usually want to drop their appeals. They were happy then.
Keep that in mind.
All right. Let's get back into the episode here.
No,
Okay.
we want to deep dive into all of the Wisconsin state penitentiaries. Okay, that's next. Slay that in for next week. Is one of the spots.
Okay, we can do that. I'm sure my brother-in-law will be happy to oblige.
Yeah.
But that is a 9.5 average between the three of us. Thanks for the easy math, Pop.
Sure.
All right. Novelty. Now, as many people know, I have started to experiment splitting the category between originality and execution, as I've kind of awarded points on both sides of this already before I formally started splitting the category. I would say this is a 4 in originality because it's not completely reinventing buddy road trip movies, but it is kind of a unique entry within that genre. I say it's also about a 3 for execution. It's not one of the most highly executed movies. I don't think the acting is particularly great outside of Nicholson because you didn't have a lot of great trained actors. And even Fonda and Hopper, I think, are somewhat forgettable. But I do think, as far as cinematography goes, as far as music selection goes, some of the other aesthetics that are part of the film, and I do think make it worth an experience to watch at least once, are of a higher level. So I have a 3 and a 4 for a 7 overall.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you in the 3 and the 4, the 7 overall. Like I said, I don't think it's the first road trip movie, but I feel like it does have a different take on it. And then the same thing with that. I don't really have too much to say about the novelty of it, but I think I would agree with you in the 4 and the 3 for a 7.
As far as originality, I went in the 3.5 because it's not that original as far as the fact it's a road movie. But the execution is, which is it's completely the setting, how it's executed, the context, the characters themselves and what their backstories are is. So I went with a 4.5 for that. So
Ooh.
I'm at a 8 overall.
All right. So throwing off the math, we also have a 7.33 average between the three of us for that one. All right. Classicness, which is usually a measure of how timeless something is, how well it has aged over time. Has it been ahead of its time when it originally came out? If it were a comedy, how well do the jokes still hold up? Are they still funny? Things like that are measured inside of this category. So, Dad, I will let you take this category as you often lead.
All right, so let's start with the easy one, which is I usually start with a 7 and I go up or down. Okay. I got to go down because with all the problems with opioids and all the rest of that, snorting cocaine to start the film kind of, and selling cocaine and doing drug deals, I don't know about the classicness of that. The acid trip, again, kind of detracts for me. So that puts me down around about a 6 right now. And I'm going to go lower yet because this film has Phil Spector. And if you're not remembering who Phil Spector is Phil Spector was a record producer. He created the Ronettes. He was the first promoter and producer for Ike and Tina Turner. And he was a huge, he worked with the Beatles on some of their later projects, including, I believe, the White Album. Well, he put a gun in his girlfriend's mouth and pulled the trigger and then claimed she tried to commit suicide and was ultimately convicted and put in prison for 19 years to life and died in prison in 2021.
Can you not look so happy when you're saying that?
I'm being sarcastic in doing so. Anyway, so now I'm down to about a 5.5. Okay. Now, the fact that the portrayal was accurate of the Deep South and the hatred for anybody different than the common culture the actual portrayal of the commune lifestyle and how things were in the 60s, which still exists. And I think to some extent, there's a certain group of people who kind of long back to that time frame. So I'm going to give it a few points up. So I'm resting at a 6.5 right now.
Wow, you kind of threw me off with the gun in the mouth guy. Bill Mr. Fassbender. I mean, I was gonna go higher, but geez, if I think about it in that terms, I don't know if I want to give this good a good score. I mean, the only thing the classicness is that really bogs me, as I already kind of made my points about it, is the student film section. I don't think that ages very well. I think that's pretty bad. But like I still give it like an 8 out of 10 though. I don't go that low. I like the representation of the South. I feel like that gives you a very good representation of what the South was at that time. And the same thing I agree, the same thing with the commune as well. You give a very good representation of the commune. And especially they kind of have the same feel as the South, except it's undertones. Because you could still feel like those two bikers are the outsiders and they're trying to be part of that group. That's my thought.
Well, Dad, you and I, once again, have very similar feelings on this particular film. Like many of our work, I think we come at it from very similar angles. While I didn't factor in the Phil Spector of it all, and certainly didn't have the gleeful retelling of his entire adventure.
Well, it was a huge deal back about 10 years ago. So, and a lot of people, Phil would never do that. Yeah, okay.
Well, ultimately, I had to knock this film down a bit because I just think that hippie culture is kind of aged out considerably and is somewhat of a relic, as has commune culture. And I just don't think translate well for a modern audience. I don't think it also speaks well to a section of culture in America the way it did at the time. So this is somewhat of a relic movie, or a movie stuck in its time for me. And I don't know what the audience is for this movie, or would be anymore, other than just film nerds and film historians.
They're art carriers.
Yes, the art card carriers. To be fair, I will say that you argued me up a little bit on some of the authenticity, but I don't know how that necessarily translates well to classicness. That to me still feels somewhat of a relic move, but I'll soften from the 5.5 I was originally going to give it and give it a 6.
So should we coin a term? Irrelevant cinema curious?
I'm not opposed to that. I think there's a better term for it, but I think we need to workshop it.
Okay. That's just what I came up with. You know, people want to see a film just because they've heard about it and they want to watch it, and then they go, okay, I've seen it.
That feels like every Andrew Korn's suggestion I get.
Oh, Mr. Corns. The gauntlet has been thrown down.
He'll be watching this 2 days after I record the 2014 episode for his show. So
your phone will blow up.
Oh yeah. Well, first off, I talk to him all day, every day. So yeah, I know it's coming.
I see.
But I told him already I was getting better at my hot takes.
Aha.
So that's a 6.83 average between the three of us for classicness. Finally, let's go to rewatchability, where I have also said that I came up with a few criteria of my own as to what exactly constitutes putting it on versus leaving it on for the two sections of this category we've kind of roughly adopted. So as far as putting it on, I am only putting this movie on if I had to, and to a degree, I might be somewhat avoiding it. So it's somewhere between a 1 and a 2, which for me would be a 1.5. As far as leaving it on, would I turn it immediately off if it started playing? Like I flipped across the channel and it's like showing scenes? Maybe not. But am I going to stop and watch 5 minutes of it if there's nothing else on? Not really. So again, it's between a 1 and a 2 for me. So I have a 1.5 and a 1.5 for a 3.
You were at a 3?
3.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay. This is one where if somebody said, I've never seen the movie and I'd like to, I'd go, okay, I'll put it on. Really? You really want to see it? You really do? You sure you can't? I can't convince you not to. So, will I leave it on? Yeah. Let's see. If the only thing on is like, I don't
Professional bowling.
know, WWE. So I'm at a 3 also.
So I'll just go off of how I score my movies, because I do my movies up to the 1 or the 0 out of 5. So anything 3 and above, I consider a good movie. Usually the 5 are the movies I'm actively going to see. So it's my favorite movies. So I think they're very good. 4s, or if I come across them, I probably will watch them. 3s, I've watched them. I think they're a good movie. I'll probably never watch it again. And then anything below 3 is going to be the bad movies. That either I didn't like it when I watched it, but I'm not going to say it's a bad movie. And then 1, it was a terrible movie, and 0 is I'm counting the seconds of my life that are gone because I watched that movie. Like I said, I would start off with the 3 there, but if it was on TV and I came across it, I would watch it again. So I do the 4. So if we're doing out of 10, and 4 times 2 is 8. So I do the 8 out of there, because I would watch it if it came back on.
This is the advantage of having a guest. You have a different perspective than we do, and we have a tendency to think too much alike.
So the average on that category is a 4.67.
Whew.
For audience score, we had a 71% for Google users, and we had an 82% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us a 7.55.
Did you have an audience score for art?
100%.
So to repeat the categories, we had a 7.33 for legacy, for impact and significance. We had a 9.5. For novelty, we had a 7.33. For classicness, a 6.83. For rewatchability, 4.67. And for audience score, a 7.55, giving us a final total of 43.21. And currently placing it on our list between Office Space and the Kane Mutiny at 147.
Office Space is that low? Wow.
You can listen to that episode and figure out why.
I will.
If you disagreed with any of our scoring, please write us at any of our socials at GMOAT Podcast, GMOAT Podcast, at Letterboxd, YouTube, Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter, and we also have a Facebook page. Or you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com or at RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMOAT Podcast. That's Ronnie with a Y, not an IE. Let's move to remaining questions. What do you think the meaning of the ending is?
I'm going to interject. I have a comment about you said your X, formerly known as Twitter. When are we going to stop referring to X like it's Prince, the artist formerly known as Prince type thing, and just go with it as X instead of calling it that? X.
No, because X is stupid. And I think Elon did a terrible disservice.
But I don't think we're going to go back on it, so why don't we just accept it and go, it's X?
Because I don't want to accept it. Fuck Elon.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But back to the meaning of the ending. I mean, I just to see it as society is going to be very hard to accept any sort of freedoms or liberties. This freedom, that's all I can see is society just has a hard time accepting this type of personality of culture. I don't know.
Okay.
I was tripping over a lot of words there. I'm still stuck on the X part.
Dad?
Ultimately, those who go against traditional society are crushed.
A much better way of saying it than I did.
Dissent will not be tolerated.
Yeah. It's almost 1984-ish.
What do you take away from the LSD trip in the New Orleans cemetery? Should the scene be taken literally? And again, this is the student film section of the movie.
Are we talking about literally taken out of the film so we don't have to watch it ever again?
I think I likened it to a 90s grunge music video. That's what it most looked like or represented to me.
Oh, but those are much better. This is so bad.
I mean, the only thing that was missing was a old man with his shirt off.
That is true.
Yeah.
The scene, it just it didn't need to be in the film. Why? It just take it out. Yeah, I think the film surfaced much better. I think it's just trying to add time for some odd reason, and in my opinion, it dragged on way too long as well. Like, I think it was 5+ minutes of this scene. I'm like, okay, we don't really need this. And it's like continuation from the Mardi Gras scene, which was kind of cool. I'd rather have more of that scene where they're walking through Mardi Gras, seeing all these interesting parades that were going on at the same time. But then we have to go due to this weird student film section for 5 minutes, and then the film ends.
It's one of two things. It's either literally they wanted you to experience what an acid trip was like, or it was supposed to represent what they perceived traditional society to be. That mind-numbing, that chaotic, that disorienting.
Yeah, I think you can look at it any way you want. It's probably something that, much like one of your favorite sayings, is a Rorschach test.
Yeah.
You can see whatever you want out of it. And for us, it was a 90s grunge film or some type of like weird student film trip on acid, and could have been removed and the film would have been just fine. So any remaining questions for either of you?
Not for moi.
That was a really weird way of saying that.
What did you guys think of the outfits?
I guess I haven't really given it a ton of thought, but there is an obvious time put into the design of how those two would go. Fonda representing, obviously, America generally with the flag jacket and the flag motorcycle, but I'm not really sure what to take out of Hopper's character other than he kind of looks like a desperado, kind of, a throwback of type. So is this like a combination of Western mountain man type of thing? Is this supposed to represent kind of a Wild West aspect? I don't know. I guess I hadn't put much thought into it.
That's what I put it in, as the Wild West cowboy sort of look. Because you have not multiple. You have a couple scenes where you have that dichotomy where they kind of seem like the modern cowboy. The best one is early on in the scene where they're changing the tire. Like you have the cowboys that are changing the horse's shoes, and then camera moves over and they're changing the tire on the modern horse, which is the motorcycle.
Yeah.
But
I guess that's the only thing I could say, but you have such a contrast between the two styles.
Yeah, but then I just don't understand. Like the one that stands out is Peter Fonda's like the Captain America thing going on. I'm like, this didn't make sense. I'm like, these two guys, they're just like, I mean, they're very unique, but it just didn't make sense to me as we're.
Well, I don't know if the two styles blended together all that well, if that makes sense, but yet they're iconic to themselves because of the look.
Yeah.
Fonda was representing the traditional concept of what America was or supposed to have been, which is this independence, that every man is, his own independent being. And that's what Fonda was. But in actuality, what it was he was not, because we had become so harbored on tradition and societal norms that we ended up persecuting the very heart of what the country was supposedly supposed to stand for and what everybody claimed it stood for.
Okay, so I want to thank our guest for being on with us. You will be back again next week for our trip through Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But anything that you would like to plug for yourself before you go for this week?
Yeah, I would just like everybody to make a petition that we make the 20th time that you're as a guest be the gold jacket.
Talk to change.org.
Yes. I just would love it. Any comments for this particular episode, just at the end, do hashtag or at gold jacket. We got this.
I look forward to the robust online campaign that you're likely to start here, because our Scooby-Doo villain will take off and run with this, most assuredly. All right, Dad, any remaining thoughts for the week?
No. I actually, while I was doing paperwork today, started our one of our films for our 1942 project. So I've knocked off To Be or Not to Be. with Carol Lombard and Jack Benny. So we're going to be watching a lot of film for a while.
Yeah. You've got like 25 films to do in roughly 28 days.
Is this
Yeah, I know.
1942? Like you're watching all the films from 1942? Or oh, geez.
Correct. So our friend and friend of the show, Andrew Corns of the Revisionist Almanac, runs his own show that revisits certain years of the Oscars. And I told him, since we were filling an opening, that he could just draw a random year from the 1940s. I'm sure it won't be that bad. And his son drew 1942 out of a hat. And I laughed because this is the year that I had predicted. And then he was not appreciative. He did not particularly like 1942 and Mrs. Miniver and Yankee Doodle Dandy. I'm trying to remember. The
Pride of the Yankees.
So far of the films that we've watched, they've been somewhat strange so far. And I've only gotten through like 2.5, but it's going to be an interesting episode, to say the least.
Yeah.
But yes, we're going to
Good
be
luck.
ending up watching like 20 to 25 films here in the next month or so. I'm still finishing up, rounding off my 52 that I'm completing for him for his 2014 episode that I'm recording next Monday.
1942. So there's gonna be a lot of like propaganda movies, I'm assuming.
Yes. 49th Parallel was a definite propaganda film.
Oh, that's gonna be fun.
Remaining thoughts for me, I don't really have any. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. When you come to the end of the line with a buddy who is more than a brother and a little less than a wife, getting blind drunk together is really the only way to say farewell. Next week, for our 220th episode, we welcome back our current guest, Jesse Sertle of CineMadison, and my brother-in-law, Keith Techmeyer, to discuss my favorite film of 2019, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, for its 5th anniversary. Directed and written by Quentin Tarantino, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, and Margot Robbie. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at thenewRonnieDuncanStudios.com or at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, X, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.
Right.